This will look at a response to a 9-mark exam question for a component 2 paper both based on health and performance. Now, what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and break this down to understand what it takes you to actually get a level 3 mark in a GCSE PE exam paper. Now, the first thing we ask you to do is obviously to underline any keywords within the question. So it goes without saying here, we're going to be discussing mechanical and manual guidance, guys, okay? And how it can be used when practicing techniques in sport. It then goes on to say that we need to assess the advantages and disadvantages of both mechanical and manual guidance. And in particular, it's got to when you are teaching a beginner to swim. So we've actually been given the sport we need to comment on. One practical mistake is that you may be able to identify mechanical and manual guidance with the advantages and disadvantages, but please make sure that you do apply it to the actual sport. And the sport's been given to us, which is for a beginner's level to swim. And as you know, for a 9-marker, the success criteria, you have AO1, AO2 and AO3. AO1 is where you need to apply knowledge and understanding of mechanical and manual guidance. To gain AO2, you need to apply application of knowledge of use of guidance with a beginner in swimming, so you actually have to apply it to that sport. And finally, you need to evaluate the topic, okay? Make a reasoned judgment about the advantages and disadvantages of these types of guidance with a beginner swimmer. So we need to break down 2 of them. Now, it goes without saying, guys, you need to try and divide up the amount of marks you're going to try and get. But overall, you're looking at manual guidance, mechanical guidance, and then obviously some sort of evaluation or conclusion to sum up at the end, guys, okay? Now, as we look at this particular exam response, this is a very good response. It got 9 out of 9. It was a level 3. It gained level 3. The reason being is because the candidate has structured it very well and discuss each method of guidance in turn using clear paragraphs. So it's structured very, very well. They first, obviously, as you can see, discuss mechanical guidance. Now, as you can see, straight away, a description and example of mechanical guidance begins the essay, which are A1 and A2 statements. So if you look at this point here, if we look around about here, so we're going right down this side here, guys, mechanical guidance is when the performer uses equipment. So there's a good definition there straight away, and it actually gives an example of what is used in swimming because it talks about using a float, yes? And it goes on to expand this point here by saying it would be very good for beginners to use because of the different type of learning needs. So we've already broken it down to the ability level as well. It then moves on, because the reason why this is actually very good is the actual structure, the way in which it actually develops further. So if we just scroll down here for me, we are now going to start to look at this type of paragraph down here, guys. I'll just make this ready for you for this one down here. So we're going to now be looking at this type of paragraph here, because in this paragraph, okay, the candidate then makes further AO2 and AO3 statements in the next 2 paragraphs. These describe how mechanical guidance can help the beginner gain a kinesthetic feel for movement. So it's all about the movement patterns and the use of verbal feedback alongside mechanical guidance. In particular, if we look here, we're looking at the use of mechanical guidance just by this red line here that they comment on, and how it will obviously help them to complete a particular skill as a beginner. This means that the performer will receive concurrent feedback to try to improve their performance. So they are getting verbal feedback as they go through. It then states about armbands and floats, yes, and actually with the start of the swimming. So you're starting to get some sort of a comparison going here as well, guys, within this paragraph. But that clearly hits your AO2 and the AO3. The candidate also describes a valid disadvantage of this particular guidance being mechanical. A beginner could become reliant on the aid and become too scared and fearful to actually participate. This was this area here that I was highlighting for you a moment ago, where they might become a little bit too scared if they don't actually take the learning aid off and progress, guys. So there's going to be no real progression. So that is actually quite key when you use that type of guidance. Now, moving on to the next part. As you can see, this is clearly structured because the next part of the actual essay here is there's a nice paragraph break here, and this is structured quite well because it then goes on to the second type of guidance, which is obviously manual guidance. So the candidate then moves on to this paragraph in a similar type of structure and pattern and sort of format, a description is given straight away and provided. So as you can see here, it's got here mechanical guidance is where a coach puts a performer into a sporting position, and it helps them complete the actual skill. And there's a good example here as well. Okay, a good example here. Now, as we go through this, that is your AO1 and AO2, which obviously is similar structures to the one you've seen above. Okay, it then goes on to mention about it being useful for beginners. Again, we were going back to the start of the question where we are looking at the actual ability group within the sport that we've been asked to discuss. Okay, further knowledge is demonstrated with statements concerning about trust and safeguarding issues, guys. Yes, so as you can see here, we're looking at here the way in which it can, in particular, look at the terminology here that I'm starting to highlight. Okay, it's looking at bad habits. Yes, bad habits are hard to break. She's talking about the way in which you can protect the person. And in particular, if you look here, he's got about the safeguarding issues here. Also, if a coach is teaching a beginner how to swim, there is protection and safeguarding issues which limit how the beginner can actually interact with the child. Okay, so we're looking at how beginning, especially if they are a child, how it can actually affect their performance. This is actually very well structured. Now, the final part, there's then some sort of conclusion or evaluation, which is very good. If I just scroll down the page, just bear me a second, I'll just scroll down the page here, okay? Excellent. Now, this is actually quite good because the structure is impressive because it breaks down both of the actual guidances. It goes through their advantages and disadvantages, and it gives an overall conclusion or an overall evaluation, which actually concludes it off very nicely. It doesn't really add much value to it, but if you look here, there's a clear understanding and knowledge and applied to the actual sport. And there's actually a good ability to evaluate the use of mechanical guidance for an actual beginner swimmer. So it actually says here that I think the mechanical guidance is the most useful. So it actually goes into it straight away. And if you look at the terminology, it looks at independent for their learning, meaning they'll be understand better and in their own way. So it actually gives a good rounded conclusion as to which one they actually prefer. Overall, like I said to you at the start, this is a 9 out of 9 mark. And if we just go back to the top of the page here, 1 second, my apologies. We're looking at the way in which they structure it. Just one more time. If I go for a blue one here, there's a clear definition, guys, within this structure here. It's broken down. You've got the first guidance there relating to swimming. And then finally, if I just scroll down the page one final time for you here. This one here then goes on to the actual second form of guidance, which is obviously manual. And again, there's a good detailed description there of what it actually is. There's some very good terminology and examples here, and it actually feedbacks very well. So that is how, for this actual exam question, the candidate received 9 out of 9 top marks.